Reanimator is one of the faster decks, and because he doesn't have access to some of these lands, he's going to be a lot slower. So this is going to be an uphill climb for him. However, one of the cards that helped him in his first round, we'll get to that in the sideboard. Games 2 and 3 should go a lot smoother for him.
Yeah.
And with that said, we are underway. You said, Jake Moldowsky on the play as the 7 seed. Remember, that is because Manaless Dredge, as it doesn't play any mana, discards on its first turn. And Thoughtseize is incredible against the deck because it's Time Walk on top of being a Thoughtseize.
Yeah, it's not, obviously the deck isn't particularly selective about the cards it's playing or what it cares about. Everything's going to the graveyard eventually. But eventually, the way that this deck gets the ball rolling is by discarding to hand size. So discard spells like this are really challenging for Manaless Dredge to beat, not because it cares about the contents of its hand, but because it needs to get to 8 cards in hand.
Yeah, so he needs to get to 8 cards in hand before he can start playing. That Thoughtseize saw a hand of 2 Bridge from Below, Balustrade Spy, Golgari Grave Troll, Shambling Shell, and Cabal Therapy. Juha just draws the 7th card and passes the turn. He doesn't really get to start playing the game until he discards that Dredger from hand size.
And by starting to play the game, you mean starting to play an entirely different game, not really, only tangentially associated with Magic.
See, that's why you say the game. I wasn't actually referring to that he's playing Magic. He's actually playing this game of Dredge, which is kind of like Magic in that you use Magic cards to play it. But outside of that, that's where it ends.
It's like using proxies to play a different game.
Yeah, it's like when you play Pack-Rat. That's another one of those Magic sub-games. But this one, probably even less normal.
Still involves lands and spells,
Kind of. Lands and discarding. Anyway, we'll go over to Jake's turn. He has turn 2, fetch land, and we'll see how fast he can get his combo online. One of the things that you have to know about Moldowsky's deck in this matchup is he is just green light the entire way. There's no disruption on Tolvanen's side.
Yeah, he has to concern himself a little bit with Cabal Therapy, but usually that's not a concern until several turns down the line. Again, this deck's not casting the Cabal Therapy. It can get into his graveyard, it can flip over a Narcomoeba, it can do it that way, but very rarely is that card ready to go on turn 1 or turn 2.
Yeah, we see a Ponder on Jake's side. So right now, just some setup and discard. Going to try to get his combo as fast as possible. Amusingly enough, the monster he sees on top of his deck is Sire of Insanity. Typically a good card, but one that he actively does not want to cast in this matchup.
Yeah, not the target of choice.
So puts the cards back on top and draws. Juha will pass the turn, and now he gets to discard Golgari Grave Troll.
Nice. Powerful play.
Fun's going to begin here. What creature can Moldowsky put into play? He's going to careful study. Okay, he does have a Gristlebrand. It's not just Sire of Insanity. I was going to say, let's hold on.
Is Exhume mandatory? Oh, I guess the Grave Troll is a 0/0, so it just goes right back.
That's true, but it will be there for a brief moment. He'll have a 0/0. All right, 2 mana from Jake. It's going to be Exhume. Both players can put a creature from the graveyard into play. Juha can get in on the fun. He can have a creature too. It just doesn't do too much.
This is a sheer delight.
Jake reads the card. Okay. Technically, until Jake's done resolving his half of the spell, it doesn't die. And there you go. State-based effects are checked. Grave Troll right back where he came from. It's Gristlebrand for Jake. And from this spot, things are going to be hard for Juha to win. He doesn't really have any permanence in play yet.
I hope that the viewers at home don't mind that I'm, generally speaking, unable to conceal my contempt for Manaless Dredge.
When your opponent has nothing registered in the land column, that they're up to no good.
Yeah, historically that's been the case.
I want to say one of my favorite things I have seen. Was Magic Online. It was a photo that was posted. A player playing the Oops All Spells deck was put on the play game 1 by his opponent. So he played a turn 1 Balustrade Spy and targeted his opponent and milled the guy's entire deck.
Pretty awesome.
Anyway, 7 cards drawn by Jake. He's going to go down to 8.
So I guess at this point, what is nice if Jake can find is a Lotus Petal plus another discard spell. Although I suppose at this point it doesn't really matter because you can get the ball rolling with what he has in the graveyard.
So Grave Troll is in play.
Oh, it's both graveyards. Excuse me. I thought Grave
Troll.
Troll.
All right. So actually, I don't know if Exhume is optional, but
I think it's mandatory.
Okay. 2 Lotus Petals from Jake. It likely doesn't matter here. You see Jake's hand flush with cards. And Juha's really not going to get to play very much here.
I guess he can just remove a counter to. This thing is not even a magic card. It's just a thing in someone's graveyard. So the
Yeah.
text on it, I don't exactly remember the details. But I think
the text starts with Dredge 6.
you
I
can
know
remove
that
a counter
much.
to regenerate it, I think. So you can just put it back. Yeah. Points at the sire and says, no, thank you.
Yeah, that would really be one of the cards Jake wouldn't want to put into play here.
Oh, no, I guess he has to.
Yeah, he has to
Oh.
keep the Golgari Grave
Oh, do you have to
Troll
pay
here.
a mana to remove?
Yeah, you have to pay a mana to regenerate
Sorry.
him.
Should have had
Whew.
some mana in your deck, I guess.
Where would be the fun in that?
That's a good point.
You don't get to unlock the achievement if you play a 1-land deck. It has to be 0.
Yeah.
So Juha's turn will be discarding Shambling Shell. That's another one of those cards. This one dredges 3, not as good as the Dredge 6.
You can get a second counter on that Grave Troll, maybe somewhere down the line.
Oh, wow.
Double his clock.
Well, we'll see if that'll be good enough to answer this swing from Gristlebrand. Jake goes up to 15, Juha down to 13.
The Exhume is really insulting. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's the worst part of all of this, is making you pick up the stuff out of his graveyard and put it into play.
And you see a ponder here from Jake. He's just trying to build the biggest wall as he swings 3 times with Gristlebrand. See, more mana, Lotus Petal. He's going to reanimate
Oh, that's either player's graveyard.
Juha's Shambling Shell
No, Jake gets that.
to keep him off dredgers. Oh, this is
Delightful.
rich.
I don't remember if it was Jerry Thompson or Sam Black, but I know they liked having a reanimate in their Delver list at one point because it would just come up in random games, and if you ever played against Reanimator, well, that's delightful.
Wow, so Juha draws for the turn. Still has been unable to dredge a card. Every turn, Jake either makes him discard a card or reanimates one of Juha's creatures.
And Juha able to crack a smile through all this, which I can appreciate.
Yeah, it's
Sometimes you got to take your lumps when you're playing a deck like this, and if you can keep it in stride, that's great.
And, I mean, I think he knows this is a poor matchup game 1. Manaless Dredge is a pretty robust deck. It's very difficult to hate out because they don't even play lands or mana for a lot of their spells. But at the same time, these robust combo decks tend to be bad against the fast ones. And that's certainly something that Jake's is. Jake's going to reanimate Elish Norn. That's enough pump that the Shambling Shell plus the Gristlebrand is lethal. And game 1 goes to Jake Moldowsky.
Very rarely comes up the Elish Norn +2/+2 clause in Reanimator, but
On your opponent's creature,
yeah,
which you stole with Reanimate.
his Shambling Shell.
The Shambling Shell, yes, indeed. It's a lot of fun here. These players are going to go to the sideboard, and there are some surprises waiting. But before we get to that, we're going to bring you back into the booth for one of our trivia questions. We've been asking you all weekend about Grand Prix Orlando. That's next weekend. So if you haven't had a chance to go out there, please go ahead and get yourself out there. It's going to be our first Grand Prix with Cons of Tarkir Limited. But here's the question I have. If you go to MagicGP.com, you can see the playmat that you get from entering this event. This is awesome. It's a Magic-themed theme park. It's one of my favorite arts on it. And I'm wondering, as you enter the theme park, what Magic card from Alpha is prominently centered at the entrance to the park? This is a card that is legal in absolutely no formats, including Vintage, Legacy, anything else. So if you know what that card is, pretty iconic card from Magic.
Yes, a good friend of mine and former colleague, Matt Place, early Pro Tour competitor. He used to play his lands all over the place. And I always thought it was to screw with your opponent, kind of a rude way, you know. Usually you're used to the boards being organized, but he played him this way because he used to play Magic back when this card was a thing in tournaments.
Oh, wow.
And this was part of the skill.
That is part of the
another
strategy.
Another little hint.
If you believe you know that card, make sure you put the hashtag SCG Premium on it. And at the end of this match between Reanimator and Manaless Dredge, we will randomly select one of the correct answers for 6 months of SCG Premium. So
Take a look at these sideboards.
Going back to the match, if you talk about game 1, Juha did not win his game 1 in the top 8 and wasn't able to do it in the top 4 either. Both times he's playing against a fast combo deck, which was a lot faster than him. But he's got a trump in his sideboard, and that's 4 copies of Leyline of the Void.
It's a nice free roll, what's going on with this sideboard, because again, the nature of his deck doesn't really allow him to play spells. So it's a lot of 0 mana stuff. He has 4 copies of Mindbreak Trap, 4 Leyline of Sanctity, 4 Leyline of the Void, 2 copies of Signature Shoal, which is probably just sort of like for generic creature matchups, I would assume, And 1 Ashen Rider, which I'm guessing is to give him an out to things like Ensnaring Bridge. I think the 4 copies of Leyline of the Void obviously going to come in here, and I think the Ashen Rider is a reasonable reanimate target as well.
Yeah, so the other cards he has in his sideboard, in case you're wondering, Sickening Shoal, Leyline of Sanctity, Mindbreak Trap, Ashen Rider. Not too much he can do here. If he didn't know Jake's list, he could board an Ashen Rider to deal with the show and tell that is sometimes out of the sideboard of the Reanimator deck. However, Jake does not have that transformational board. He has no show and tells in the main and none in the board, so Juha can go ahead and leave the Ashen Rider if he needs to.
Well, I'm not super sure that's the case just because of what's going on in Jake's sideboard. We have 3 Abrupt Decay, 2 Spell Pierce, 2 Duress, an Iona, an Aetherling, 2 copies of Pithy Needle, a Crippling Fatigue, 2 copies of Tormod's Crypt, and a Blazing Archon. The 2 Tormod's Crypts, of course, will be coming in. I think the Pithy Needles are probably reasonable for naming Phantasmagoria, which you can shut, so you can shut down that action. Besides that, I think the 1 Blazing Archon is okay to bring in this matchup, though Ellisnorn is probably Reanimator target number 1.
Yeah.
And the Ashen Rider does allow him to get out of Blazing Archon.
One thing you should know about the deck that Juha Tolvanen's playing is he actually doesn't need to attack to win the game. So his combo involves Flayer of the Hatebound. This is a card from Innistrad that when creatures unearth, they deal combat damage. They deal damage equal to their power to any target, and to 1 of Blightsteel Colossus. So when he puts that in play, it will deal 11 damage to any target with Infect. So he actually can kill without the combat step here.
So that means, in your opinion, Jake shouldn't even bother with the Blazing Archon.
Well, it depends whether or not he wants to do it. I think he still probably wants Blazing Archon simply because, well, remember, he has Sire of Insanity in the main deck. I don't want to get anywhere near that card in this matchup. So Blazing Archon has got to be among his better creatures. What I'm saying is he can't hope to just make Blazing Archon, sit back, and watch himself win.
Right.
He's got to keep going at that point. Given the option, Gristlebrand is still probably a better reanimation target than the Archon.
Though, of course, the big jewel in all of this is the 4 copies of Leyline of the Void.
But we'll go ahead and see how that plays out. The 2 copies of Tormod's Crypt in Moldowski's board, sure to be relevant here. Tormod's Crypt, one of the better tools against Dredge, simply because, like when you compare it to Relic, is that it doesn't require Jake to leave up any mana for its activation.
Yeah. No, Tormod's Crypt, I used to play a lot in my sideboards. It's sort of been dwarfed over the last couple of years because there's been so many great anti-graveyard cards printed. But Tormod's Crypt's still one of the best in class.
Yeah, it is the cheapest. It's the cheapest, the fastest. It doesn't draw you a card, but outside of that, if you just need to hit the yard at all costs, it's still the go-to guy. Juha puts Jake on the play. Once again, Jake has a turn 1 discard spell. No Leyline for Juha. We'll see what he's keeping. Does he get to play the game this time? We will see. He has Dread Return, Stinkweed Imp, Flayer of the Hatebound, Icarid, Street Wraith, Golgari Thug, and Bridge from Below.
No guarantee that Jake can hit on turn 1 Duresses. The Manaless Dredge deck is very creature dense, but fortunately there's something for him to take. Doesn't even matter if it's a bridge or a flashback spell, just something to prevent Juha to discarding from hand size.
So Juha's going to draw on turn 1. He goes ahead and draws a Bridge from Below, and we'll have to pass back to Jake. And it's going to be Entomb from Jake Moldowsky. And these games, for a second time, may be over before they start. No Leyline in Juha's hand means free reign once again for Jake.
Uh-oh.
It's going to be Elesh Norn. And he'll go ahead and reanimate that. This card does not win on its own, though it's pretty good.
So what is the way to actually get out from under this?
All right, going ahead, looking at his board here.
Yeah, I mean...
Oh, maybe, okay, he doesn't have it. Wait, no, you're right. I was going to say he could blight steal from here, but Flayer of the Hatebound is a 4/2.
Yeah. So
wait, he can make, it has Undying, so it can come into play as a 4/2. It can undie into a 3/1, and then he could make Blight Steal. It would only deal 9 Infect. This is going to be really hard to win through Elesh Norn.
Yeah, and there was also a Daze in Jake's hand, which stops the Dread Return and
yeah,
et cetera,
well,
et cetera. So